Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Katie Unsweiler. I'm the marketing manager here at VonLehman CPA Advisory Firm. Today's event is being held on Zoom webinar, so you will not have the option to show video or mute yourself. Had a few questions about that and just wanted to make sure we were good to go on that. We are recording the session, so if you have any questions, things that you might have missed or things that you had to step away for, you can watch that at a later time. We are offering CE for this event, and CE certificates will be emailed following attendance report verification. In addition to the recording link, we will be including the email addresses for all of the panelists today, as well as our moderator. So if you have any questions that we are not able to get to afterwards, you are welcome to submit those. If you do have questions live during today's event, please submit them in the Q&A feature, and we will get to as many of those as we possibly can. Before we get started, I wanted to give a huge thank you to HORAN and Graydon for their partnership on this event and the events that we've done in the past. They're fantastic partners, and we look forward to partnering again in the future. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Beth Weiss.
All right, thanks, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a very exciting topic today on plan design. So I think the key here is that, plan design is not something that you just do when you start a plan. You have to revisit it throughout the life of the plan, and there's always changes that potentially need to be made. So I think this just serves as a really good reminder for those that are, new in the world of retirement plans, but maybe it's not a document that you look at very often. So this is a good refresher on some things for you to consider. I am an audit shareholder here at VonLehman. I oversee our employee benefit plan audit practice, which is just ramping up right now. So this is very good timing. We're really excited. We have an all-star panel here today of three of the best people in the Cincinnati area when it comes to employee benefit plans and retirement plans. So I'm going to let each one of them give a quick introduction about themselves, and then we have some questions that we're going to run through and let them answer. If you do have any questions at all, this is a great opportunity. You've got an attorney on here for free right now, so feel free to chat your questions in, and we will try to get to as many of those as we possibly can. So Laura, I'll let you kick it off. You want to give a quick intro?
Okay, well, like Beth, I'm also a CPA. Started my career in public accounting, but then moved into the retirement plan area. And initially, I worked on plans with thousands and tens of thousands of participants. But I am the daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter of small business owners. My heart is in the small business community. So I saw a niche for a firm that focuses on small and medium-sized companies. And what Beth said is so true. There are special issues for smaller companies. I think the compliance testing is more challenging, the discrimination testing, top-heavy testing, coverage testing. But the potential to design a plan that meets an employer's needs is actually much better. And we accountants can be creative. This is an opportunity for our creative juices to flow, trying to find a plan that's customized to the client, not a cookie cutter approach, not the one-stop shopping that you tend to see frequently with bundled providers who adopt provisions that are easy for them, but not necessarily beneficial to the employer.
All right, thanks, Laura. John, how about you?
Thanks. So I'm John Kirk. I'm an attorney at Graydon. I practice in the employee benefits and executive comp areas. Like Beth and Laura, I'm actually an accounting major, though I never sat for the CPA exam because I knew I was going to law school. So you're safe from having 3 CPAs on the call. I've worked with small companies, public companies, 1, 2 people to 30,000 people, and they all have unique issues. But I do think for some, your mid-sized to smaller companies, I think the issues are sometimes harder because you don't have the resources that those large companies have. You have to rely on people, frankly, like us. You don't have the internal expertise sometimes to handle everything that comes up, and so that's why I really like working with the mid-sized world. I said my mic's a little low. Is that better? I hope. No. All right. I'll change it here in a second.
Okay, Paul, how about you?
Yeah, very good. So Paul Carl, I am a retirement advisor and consultant with HORAN. 35 years in the industry, first 8 with the U.S. Department of Labor. John, I think we share a similar background.
I only did about 3.5, so you lasted longer than I did.
Just like the other panelists, ironically, I have a degree in accounting as well, and also not a CPA. So it's 2 on 2 today, I guess, is the best way to describe it. But you know what I think is important about plan design, it is one of our 4 service pillars at HORAN, and we're dedicated retirement advisors. But it's more than just about investments and employee education. It's really important to know the plan design and dig into it and the operations and the regulatory changes that go on. So I'm excited to participate today with these outstanding individuals, and let's go, Beth.
Okay. All right. Well, Paul, then I will kick it off with you for the first question. So, you know, a lot of companies may be seeing that, you know, they were used to having education provided by their advisors, but maybe that's been trickling a little bit in the wrong direction. And as a result, you know, you're seeing less and less employees contribute, or maybe, you know, employees not contribute as much. You know, do you have any examples of how adjusting your plan design could help with that?
Yeah, Beth. Great question to start out with. So, you know, a few years ago, we ran a little town hall, and we brought in one of our clients that had adopted auto enrollment and auto escalation. And then we had brought in a client that was using education only as their source of promoting retirement plan and, you know, path to retirement success. And what it boils down to is, and statistically, you know, various companies have run this, the plan design will go a lot further than the education. The education's important, but the right plan design can really kick some retirement savings into gear and help participants on that path to financial success. And, you know, just share with that town hall meeting that we had, at the conclusion of it, the client that was education only subsequently, you know, became a little bit more engaged in plan design with us, and ultimately adopted some auto enrollment and auto escalation features for their plan. So it's extremely important.
Okay, great. All right. Laura, I'm going to kick it over to you now. You know, there's so much to consider when you're looking at a plan. There's so many different provisions you can adopt or not adopt. If you had to just pick 1 or 2 to really focus on, if somebody was really trying to adopt, you know, a successful plan, what recommendations would you have?
Well, I think this is an easy one. The employer has to have some skin in the game, and if you're doing a 401k plan, to have a meaningful match. And I know employers have to look at they have to make certain they can afford the plan. And we do a lot of projections, assuming everyone participates, to make certain they can afford a specific match. But the biggest incentive, and I know a lot of, and I don't disagree with Paul that automatic enrollment has great results, but the biggest factor I've seen in encouraging participation and empowering employees to save for themselves is a meaningful employer match. Now, maybe I'm just a frugal West Side gal, and, you know, we save a lot from the West Side, and I'm a CPA, so I appreciate, you know, if I put in $1 and my employer puts in another $1 or 50 cents, I've made a great return. But the match is extremely important. There are other features, and I know I get in some debates where some investment people, not Paul, who say, well, let's offer 80 investment funds and let them take up to 10 loans, and let's throw in a hardship withdrawal provision. No. That's all possibly lovely, but possibly not. The match is extremely important. I also think transparency and openness by the employer. I've often said I can tell so much about a company by working on their retirement plan. You learn so much about their culture and their approach to their employees and their work. And transparency by the employer, openness, that's also very important. You can match 100%, but if they don't have confidence in their employer and the way it's set up, it won't sell either. So for me, a meaningful employer match, if it's a 401k plan.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
and to piggyback, I think, I'm gonna split the difference here. I think auto enrollment's great for getting people in your plan, but once they're in, that match really makes the difference. And that's what keeps the employees happy. And that's where they actually see, oh, maybe I won't take my money out. Now I'm seeing a real benefit from that. And that's really where education comes in, is educating them on that match and what that means to them. I've seen it in big, small, whatever. Sometimes it's as simple as sitting down, with an employee or with a group of employees and just showing them the math. You put in $1, we put in $1. Now you have $2, and let's project that out 20 years. Even if you're not with our company, but if you just keep your money in an account in a 401k somewhere, look how much you're going to have for retirement at the end. And you're doubling the money for free.
And John, a change I've seen too is it used to be we do employee meetings that, oh, we've got a young group, this is going to be a hard sell. I have seen a dramatic change, and the millennials are very tuned in to the importance of them taking ownership of their retirement. Maybe they're a little cynical about Social Security. Maybe they have reason to be, maybe not.
A little cynical?
But they understand that they have to take ownership of it. It's really been a heartening change to see over the years. And I'll confess, when I was in my 20s, was I overwhelmed by the money purchase pension plan my employer had? No, I really wasn't. Fortunately, I did IRAs and a lot of other things, but it is a sea change. And the match is a tremendous incentive for people to do what we know they need to do, save for their retirement, if they're smart enough to work for an employer with a plan.
We did have a question come in through the chat. So Katie, I'll grab that just because it's related here. You talked about a meaningful match. Do you have any, and obviously it's going to depend company by company and there's a lot of factors, but in your experience, do you have any guidance on what is a meaningful match?
Well, that's relative, Beth.
Yes.
and I am not minimizing or disparaging modest matches if that's all the employer can do. Yeah. I saw a study, and it's been a while since I saw it, but they said you really don't get much more bang for your buck when you match over 50 cents on the dollar, that's enough incentive. But a 50% match or 25%. That being said, we actually have clients that match 5% and 10%. I just don't think that's enough, but it may be all they can afford. So some match is better than no match, and I'm in no way disparaging their efforts. But I would go 25%, 50%, or even a safe harbor match, which we can talk about later, which is a fabulous employee benefit.
Yeah. Go ahead, John.
I'll say, no, I think the safe harbor is great, but I think whether it's 25, 50, whatever percent, I think you do need to go up to about 3 or 4% at least to say, we'll match up to this much that you contribute, to have the employee contribute more. Even if we have auto escalators in there, we want to start them at that 3 or 4% so they can get some meaningful money in, and then have that grow, even if, either automatically or have them grow it as they put more percentages in.
We've been meeting with employers, and we've been suggesting that if you have auto enrollment and if you have a match, let's say at 4% or 5% or 6%, that auto enrollment be at that full match level. So if you're willing to provide the match at a certain amount, why not go ahead and have the employee auto enroll at that level and capture as much match as possible? It's interesting, what we're talking about here is culture and budget. And it's kind of like, what is your culture? Now, what can you afford? And let's have that discussion and marry those two. And maybe it's one thing right now, but I can't remember if Beth or Laura mentioned this, but it's something to revisit at least annually from that perspective.
Yeah. All right, great. Thank you. Well, Laura, you actually brought up my next topic, so I'll let anyone chime in here, but safe harbor, that is not new, but I think a lot of people still don't fully understand that and know kind of when it works, when it doesn't, when you should think about that. So again, anybody jump in. When do I know if some sort of safe harbor plan is best for my plan?
I'll take a stab and you guys go on. I think a safe harbor is good anytime you're trying to increase participation, those sorts of things. But I think it's especially useful if you've had trouble passing the discrimination testing. And that's usually, sometimes, to Paul's point, culture, we're a generous company. We want to have this nice match for our employees, and the safe harbor is a nice way to do that. But a lot of times I see people sort of fall into the safe harbor because, oh no, we've failed testing the last couple of years, and now we have to give people money back, or we didn't catch it, and now we have to do a correction program and give people money back, and we failed the testing. And how do we get rid of that? It's just a headache at the end of the year of having the discrimination testing failures. And the safe harbor is a good way to avoid that. So that's where I see it most effective, as far as like plan design issues, is taking away the administrative hassle of some of your testing.
It also enables you to go to your highly compensated employees and say, we've been holding you back on your savings, but now you can do the maximum 401k, the 19,500 or the 26,000 if you're 50 or older. And, I've had many participants say, I've worked my entire life to finally be making the money I'm making now. And now you're telling me I can't save because of this darn discrimination test. And it really is unfair. And I am very sympathetic to their comments. So if an employer is getting a lot of complaints from valuable employees that, gee, I want to save, but you're not letting me because the testing fails, the safe harbor will remedy that. And in this tight labor market, that's a good selling point too.
Mm-hmm.
Not only is it a wonderful fringe benefit, I mean, it's a 3 or 4% employer fully vested contribution, depending on which safe harbor you adopt, but it's a good selling point to those who might make more than $130,000 a year, be considered quote unquote highly compensated, and have restrictions on them otherwise.
Yep.
Paul, anything you wanted to add on the safe harbor route?
Hey, I think it's a great tool. To Laura's point, I mean, there's different formulas available.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way to really incorporate some really unique and robust plan design using certain of those formulas within Safe Harbor. But, most importantly, people just need to know that it's a committed contribution that's going to be, with one exception, 100% vested, immediately vested. And, but it's going to have some really positive outcome for maybe some of your most influential employees as well. So, yep.
Paul, it isn't the cost sometimes that frustrates some of our clients. It's the full and immediate vesting. They say, oh, I have 3 or 4% of pay, I can do that. But that full vesting, it is just funny. Each employer's different, but many times that's the stumbling block. And I do caution employers, you want to make certain that you can afford it. It's like a fixed expense. I'm going to sound like an accountant here. It's not to say you can't get out of a safe harbor, but I view it year to year as a fixed expense that you have set this aside.
No, I can't say, because of recent guidance from the IRS and everybody, we have seen a few employers get out of their safe harbor, especially this year, because of that fixed expense. But even some of those that ended it for 2020, as they're moving into 2021, they're thinking about bringing it back.
Mm-hmm.
Because we needed to save money for a little while. Things are starting to uptick, and frankly, the labor market's very tight, and it's a nice employee retention and a recruitment tool. And now that we need more employees, we want good employees, and so it's like, I know we got rid of it, but it's time to bring it back. It was good for that 1 year.
Yeah. So John and Laura, you guys have both mentioned this now, and again, anybody's open to answer, but all you hear about when you talk to people is the tight labor market. We can't find anybody, we can't find anybody, we can't find anybody. So, you mentioned safe harbor. Are there any other trends in the area of plan design that help with this tight labor market that companies are experiencing?
Well, I can say something I've seen, and we see the pendulum swing on this, but with the tight labor market, more generous eligibility. Especially if an employer is doing the safe harbor match, when they're putting real money into the plan, they frequently like to weed out their turnover. So they'll have a full year of service. But with this tight labor market, I'm seeing more generous eligibility, date of hire or 3 months instead of a full year. It's an interesting trend. It has some cost ramifications, but it's some small thing to do if you think it helps you attract and retain people. Another trend I've seen, and this is more with smaller employers, but the Secure Act had, we're seeing employers who thought they could get away with not having a plan. And now they really recognize to attract and retain good people, you've got to have good benefits. And one of them is a retirement plan. The Secure Act has some good provisions in it regarding a startup plan credit. If you have fewer than 100 employees, so this is going to be smaller employers, but you can get a lovely credit for 3 years for starting up a plan. And I know Paul talks a lot about automatic contributions. If you put in an eligible automatic contribution arrangement, you can get a credit as well. So it's an incentive to help pay for the costs of implementing a plan.
Yeah, no, I think for labor market, I think number one is have a plan. To Laura's point is whatever your plan is, having, if I'm an employee, I think I get some retirement or I get no retirement, my wages are about the same. You'd think the rational employee would go to where there's a plan, and it's generally probably right. But I think next is that making eligibility a little more generous. If your average turnover is say 60 days, well, maybe you make it first of the month after 90 days enrollment, or first of the month after 60. If your average turnover is 30 days, well, you maybe can be more generous. So you can look at when are we losing people, and then let's just move a little beyond that to have enrollment, so we keep those good employees, those employees that have sort of, I'll say, lasted through their probationary or get to know you period, whatever you want to call it. But we don't need to have them there a whole year before they get a retirement benefit. We can take the safe harbor, we can take enrollment, we can take lots of little pieces of plans and sort of make it enticing to those new employees.
We're seeing a trend, and we have over the last few years, where the 1 year age 21, that's not in existence almost anymore. And we're definitely seeing a trend where eligibility is tying in a lot of cases with the other benefits, be it health insurance and so forth. And then Laura, you brought up vesting. Let the vesting schedule kind of do its work. So if you have turnover and if you're not safe harbor, make the best match you can, make it attractive, and then use the vesting schedule as that retention tool to continue to earn, the actual dollars that are being contributed on your behalf. And so it becomes really a recruitment and retention play for employers.
Great.
Yeah, I think if you look at labor trends, the average, millennials and younger generations, they're staying in jobs 5 years or less. So that to Paul's point, that's where that vesting is going to be very, very useful. Is we probably know they're going to leave eventually, and I think if you see studies, they say the best way to get a raise is go somewhere else. And so if you're losing people after 3 years, well, maybe you're looking at a 5-year vesting. If you're losing people in 2, maybe it's a 3-year vesting. But there's ways you can structure that to help you on the labor side, while also giving the benefits of the plan.
Okay, great, thank you. Paul, I'm going to kick it back to you. So a lot of times, you might hear that your plan is cookie cutter, or it's a very basic plan. So what does that really mean? And is that good or bad?
So I've used the term cookie cutter before. Sounds like it might be a derogatory term. It's not. But, in my mind, it does raise the question that somebody sit down and really help design this plan, because cookie cutter to me is a very, on the one hand, very simplistic and easy to operate. But on the other hand, is it really meeting the culture? What the employer wants? Is it maximizing the benefits to the extent that they can afford, via the budget? And I'll just mention there's certain providers out there who perform record keeping services that maybe maybe their focus is in a different service, but this is a peripheral. You know, that's where we seem to find the most simplistic plan designs. And, you know, it's just one of those situations where a lot of employers, plan sponsors don't know what they don't know. So they just kind of go with maybe what they were told. And there's more robust plan design out there to for them to adopt and offer.
Yep. John, Laura, did you guys have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, sorry, Laura.
No, go on,
ahead.
Joe. No, go on.
You know, a lot of times, you know, to Paul's, yeah, cookie cutter doesn't sound great. And you say it's a cookie cutter plan, but you know, for some clients, that's exactly what they need. You know, it's sort of, they want to have a sort of a simple match. Maybe it's a safe harbor, not a lot of twists and turns and eligibility, and a prototype plan or a volume submitter plan, you know, that's just like 10 other companies or 100 other companies, works well for them. You know, and then I have clients where I'm drafting individual design plans because every single aspect of that plan is something custom to meet their culture. But it feels sometimes when they put in, especially mid-sized, smaller employers, when they're putting in these prototype plans or these cookie cutter plans, they don't spend a lot of time on the plan documents. You know, you get that adoption agreement, and it's just sort of checking boxes as they go because they don't want to be there for 3 hours with whoever's helping with the plans. Oh, yeah, no, yeah. And they don't really pay attention to what I just checked the box on, which then becomes the plan language. And 2 years down the road, they're like, well, our plan does this. Well, that's not what you check the box on. So take time if you're going to, you know, however you do your plan, you know, take the time to know what you're putting in the plan so you know how the plan's going to run. You know, even the cookie cutter plans need some thought into them, you know, when you're setting those up.
I agree with that, John. And, you know, a lot of times we'll see employers that put in a plan quickly because they were under pressure to get it done. And now they're coming up for air and they're pausing for a moment. They're saying, okay, now we're ready to get serious. And let's look at what we really have. And let's design it a little better. One of my pet peeves is elapsed time. I mean, elapsed time is easy for record keepers, but for some employers, it's devastating. It causes tremendous problems, but they didn't even know. So you do need to spend a little bit of time reviewing your plan provisions. The punishment doesn't fit the crime if you get it wrong.
Yeah, the punishment is very, very severe. Yeah. So when you're setting those up, just because the person says, hey, this is the easiest one to administer, that may not be the one for you.
That's exactly
You know, so ask a few questions about, well, what does that mean versus, oh, that's easy, my payroll system can do it automatically. Well, maybe it can. We hope it can.
Make it purposeful.
Yeah.
We did have a question come through the chat that I want to pose to all three of our panelists. Nice to have a shorter eligibility requirement. What about the small balances may cause an audit? Small balances not paid out timely, big expense for the employer. Any comments?
Oh, I agree. Boy, Katie, I agree with that. I want to chime in on that because we see that a lot when we take over plans, and they'll have, you know, 50 participants and they'll have 75 terminated vesteds with, you know, an average of $212 in their account. Somebody isn't monitoring the involuntary cash out provision in the plan. And I know for us, every year end, we go and we look at terminees, and if they haven't been swept out yet, we work with the employer to sweep them out. The involuntary cash out amount should be at least $5,000. We still take over plans where it's set at $1,000, hasn't been adjusted. There are reasons it's at $1,000, not good ones in my mind. So bump it up to $5,000, clean out your terminees. I say this with great respect to the terminees, nothing personal to them. We wish them all the best, but they have moved on. The employer, one, doesn't want to keep track of them for the next 20 or 30 years. Two, doesn't want to incur increased bookkeeping or record keeping expenses of monitoring, keeping those accounts and paying for them. And three, it can push you when you don't want to be there into an audit threshold. If you grow so much, you have to have an audit. That's wonderful. We celebrate your success, but don't have to have an independent audit because you didn't clean out a bunch of terminated vested participants.
Yeah,
That happens a lot.
I bet you see it a lot, Beth.
See it a lot.
Yeah, and that comes down to, you know, internal administrative controls. You know, have just as you're setting it up, and if you know you have those small balances, someone needs to be appointed within the company or your service provider, and you've had that conversation with your service provider, who's looking at this at year end, or even maybe it's part of your termination checklist. That employee terminates and someone's checking what's their balance and how's that work under the plan, so that when year end comes, you can just issue that check, get that money out of there. Employees can then, they can put it into wherever they need to put it, IRA, whatever it is. Or a lot of them, if it's, $182, they might just take it, cash it, and go on from there. But get it out of your plan and follow the requirements of your plan document on how you get those out of there.
We've also been working with record keepers very proactively to ensure that, at least once a year, if not twice or 3 times a year, they'll go through and kind of sweep out those smaller balances. Laura, to your point, especially those under 1,000 that can be cashed out. But even where we see these plans that only have the 1,000 and under cash out, I mean, why not adopt up to 5,000 and get that money kicked over to a rollover bucket? It's permissible, and it'll keep that participant count low and manageable.
Another issue we see too, and I think it's overlooked, is when participants are gone for a while, it gets hard to find them sometimes. We spend considerable effort, more so than most, trying to locate people and reunite them with their retirement money. But it gets harder as time goes. And not everyone wants to be found. It's rather interesting, some of the stories we could tell here, but not everyone wants to be located. And the employer ultimately has to find them. So the sooner you act on paying out terminees, the more success you'll have with it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I really like John's idea of, making it even part of your checklist when somebody leaves. Because keep in mind that audit requirement is as of 1/1. So it kind of flips back to the beginning of the year. So oftentimes what we hear from people is, I had no idea that I was going to need an audit. And then they're calling somebody in September when the audit's due in 6 weeks. And, it doesn't always go as smooth as planned when they need a first year audit and we have 6 weeks to get it done. But I really like that idea, John. I think that's great advice. So I think this is a really important question, and I'm sure all 3 of you can chime in. You probably helped people and plan sponsors design this, but there are going to be times where, you don't want the employer contribution to be the same for everyone. Maybe you want to find a way to keep employees. You want to reward long-term employees. So what kind of options are out there to be able to, maybe give a long-term employee more profit sharing money than you do somebody that's been there a year? So Laura, I'll start with you. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yes, this is an important part of design. And for employers who want to target contribution to specific individuals or classifications of employees, they can adopt what we call a cross-tested type of plan, where typically every employee is a separate group. And people think that employers only put this provision in to help Mr. and Mrs. Big, the owners. But I see it with a lot of employers who target some of their long-term, maybe middle management employees. And I know we've done it here. I make no secret about that, targeting people who've been with us a long time. They may not be highly compensated. You do have to subject this to discrimination testing. So if you're trying to target only your highly compensated employees, you better have really good demographics to pass the discrimination testing. But you can target anyone who's not highly compensated and give them an additional contribution. So it provides, and I don't see it in larger plans as much. I tend to see it in smaller plans under 100, but it's a wonderful design and very flexible. John, I'm sure you see it all the time when you're doing documents.
Oh, we do, and we have the conversation. Back to Paul's point earlier today is, culture. If the goal is to reward those long-term employees, and they say, hey, we really like, we're proud that people spend their whole careers with us, or they spend a long time with us, and those sorts of things. And how do we reward them? And we really can't via compensation. We can't raise salaries and those sorts of things because we're hitting ceilings or whatever with contracted rates. So cross-plan testing is a nice way to target those long-term employees, to your point, Laura, whether they're highly comp, lower comp or whatever, but they've just been with the company a long time, we can set it up to help there. Yes, there's some more discrimination tests you have to do. But if you're already sort of going down that road, it's not that hard. We have the information to run the test. The tests are very clear cut and how they're run and those sorts of things. But again, it probably is, more your mid-market, smaller groups doing it, because once you get to a very large company, it becomes really cumbersome. It's just one of those things that it's sort of phase. No one really affirmatively doesn't do it. It just sort of phases its way out as the company gets larger.
Mm-hmm.
But no, we don't see it implemented a lot, but we have that conversation a lot because it is on people's radars, and how do I help those key long-term employees?
You know where else I see it, John, too? It's business owners, and you might have a husband and wife that have had their company for years, and they haven't saved a blessed penny. And they say, I'm 50 years old now, and I want to do something lovely for my employees, but I haven't saved a blessed penny outside my business. Can you help me design a plan where I do something meaningful for my staff, but load me up, help me save maximum amounts? And
Absolutely.
It's design those plans. And we come across that quite a bit.
No, you're absolutely right. They've poured every penny into the business and they've made the business successful, but there are a lot of years where they didn't take any salary, they didn't take anything for themselves to make the business succeed. And yeah, it's better to realize that at 50 than 70. So
so it is.
Those are good ones to design.
That is true. We see, a shift from time to time from that safe harbor. They want to stay safe harbor, but they'll shift away maybe from the match and pick up the 3% non-elective, where they're meeting a number of testing requirements. So they're meeting the non-discrimination, they're meeting the top heavy. But then what they're able to do is pick up that, that gateway, that cross testing, John, that you mentioned. And Laura, I know that, you and your team run all the time just to see, where you can allocate some additional profit sharing dollars to, select employees. And, at the end of the day, we were talking about recruitment and retention. Being able to do that really helps tremendously with the retention aspect.
Absolutely.
We did have an audience submitted question. I'm going to interject real quick. With the zero to race happening between record keepers with respect to administrative benefit plan systems, how do we effectively discern if our record keeping fees are competitive and fair for our participants? Also, they noted that they do RFPs every 3 years as it is.
RFPs. Sorry, Paul. I'll say RFPs and asking around.
Yeah, I was going to say, so there's a number of services out there that can benchmark fees. We prefer to take and go out for live bids, and we can do it in a process that's as simple as benchmarking, where we request live bids from other providers. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to need to change your record keeper. But if something comes in lower, we can use it as a leverage tool to negotiate a lower fee. We obviously keep an eye on the data that is presented by the various benchmarking services, but then, a full scale RFP where you're really, what I call lifting up the hood and looking underneath and, getting into all kinds of cybersecurity and so forth. We like to see those happen every 3 to 5 years. We like the benchmarking to happen every 1 to 2 years. And all that said, I will say that we're starting to see fees level off a little bit. There was a time period in there, and rightfully so, probably about 4 or 5 years, where there were significant drops in record keeping fees, but we're starting to see that level off a little bit. But it's still important fiduciary process to go through.
There was a bit of a, oh, sorry, John, go right ahead.
I was saying, I was just going to remind people, just remember your fees don't have to be the lowest. We always talk about your fiduciary duty. They just have to be reasonable for the, what you're getting. So if you think you're getting really great value and service from your vendor, that means something, even if your fees are a little higher maybe than someone else, but it's more bare bones. So that can factor into it. But yeah, as a fiduciary, you should be on top of those fees, to Paul's point, every other year, checking benchmarking, checking studies, answer that phone call when the other vendor calls you, or the broker, whoever it is, and just have a chat with them. They may be able to share some info that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So just keep your ears open, and then do the full-blown RFP.
That actually segues perfectly into this follow-up question. Someone asked, how much of a change in fees should there be before you should make a change?
When I was going to say, when we run a benchmarking or we run the RFP, we call it fees commensurate with services. And, John just highlighted it. It's really about, is the fee reasonable with the services being delivered? That's really what it boils down to. There's no hard, fast rule that says, gosh, if you have X percent in fee decrease, potential that you should make a change. It's really got to be commensurate with the services.
Yeah, I've seen people leave for a half point, and I've seen people faced with a 10% reduction say, no, we're good. We'll stay where we are. I think you need to factor in service. I also think you need to factor in administrative headaches. What's involved in making the change, either for the company itself or for the participants. If it's going to be quite a big change and a lot of hindrances and a lot of change for the employees, maybe 2 points isn't worth it. But maybe then again it is. So it's sort of it's very personal to each company, and very personal to sort of your relationship with your vendor. But to Paul's point, the ERISA doesn't particularly care what it is as long as it's reasonable. And so reasonable is facts and circumstances decision. So if you're happy and you think you're getting good value, and you're now if it's 50% less, maybe you need to really think about what your fees are being charged. But if it's within 3, 4, 5%, that's a tough call.
Great. Thanks, everyone. All right, Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know we have some not-for-profits on the webinar today. So, sometimes you'll see a 401k plan with those. Sometimes it's a 403b. Any information you can provide to them on, kind of the difference between the two, and is there some sort of trend going on in the nonprofit world when it comes to retirement plans?
There's not a trend per se. It does seem like that maybe when did those rules change? I'm looking at John in particular. Was it around 2009 on the 403b side? That we saw a lot of not-for-profits adopt a 401k instead of a 403b because it went from an individual account plan to more of a group-oriented plan. We'll work with not-for-profits to determine which is better for them. If the not-for-profit sponsors a 403b plan, that pretty much eliminates the discrimination testing for the highly compensated employees. So they're going to be able to defer their 19.5 or their 26,000 without the repercussions. But if the not-for-profit wants to make a lot of discretionary contributions or potentially make discretionary contributions, if they want a sophisticated profit sharing or discretionary contribution formula, the 401k is going to make better sense. So John used this term, facts and circumstances. It's definitely a facts and circumstances situation. Which type of plan fits a not-for-profit best? And you know, from time to time, chances are, if one fits a not-for-profit at one point, you know, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, there should be a change considered. I'm not saying done, but you know, maybe there's enough changes in place that you should consider a different type. I know that's got a whole topic in and of itself. Laura's looking a little scared that I brought that up.
But I would add that an ERISA 403B plan more and more looks like a 401k plan these days. Of course, you don't have the discrimination testing, you have universal availability, you have a few significant differences, but clearly the 403B market has moved in the direction of other retirement plans. And a lot of the things you can do in a 401k plan, you could also do in an ERISA 403B plan.
Mhm.
Getting out of the discrimination testing, especially for those not-for-profits that have 1 or 2, you know, they don't have a ton of highly compensated employees typically, but they have 1 or 2. And this is a really nice feature not to have to test on deferrals. So we see both. I don't know that I have a preference one way or the other, to be honest.
Yeah, we see both as well. I would say probably most of the nonprofits I work with, more the 403B world. Really, to Laura's and Paul's point about the discrimination testing, it just makes it a little easier when we've got 3 employees that maybe are key, and we got a whole bunch of other people. I mean, it's a nonprofit. You know, salaries are never very high in the nonprofit world, and because the 403B lets people max out for whatever range of salary, that does help sometimes on the retirement side. Well, at least I'm getting a nice retirement benefit, or we're able to put a lot of money away because of that. You know, you do see the 401ks, but we know we don't have a lot of there's not a lot of discretionary money sometimes in the nonprofit world to do a nice profit, we'll say profit sharing,
Yeah. or
things like that. So it really does come down to, you know, how, you know, what's the financial situation of the nonprofit look like, especially the financial situation in the future, you know, what those projections look like to what might be the best fit for them, to get something to work with. But I'd say 403B is probably still, you know, very much the most common type you see in the nonprofit world.
John or Laura, where do you all see the 457B fitting in the nonprofit world?
I don't come across it a lot. I'm sure, John, you see a whole lot more of that than I do.
You know, I see more of them probably, but you don't see a whole lot of them. You know, they're layered in there, but it's just something that usually evolves through conversations or thinking, hey, we really want to do this or that, and you sort of wind your way up to a 457B plan. You don't see a lot of people come and say that we want to do a 457B plan, and part of it, I think, is just not a lot of people think about them just off the top of their head.
We you know, we'll discuss it with our not-for-profit clients. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. Of course, they're non-qualified in the not-for-profit world, so that creates, you know, a whole different dynamic as far as who owns the assets and, you know, what triggers the ownership and distributable events, and you know, how they can get distributed. But yeah, I would say not-for-profits shouldn't overlook the 457B plan because there is a place for them, but they're definitely an extra in addition to a 401k or 403B qualified.
Yeah, most typically when it comes up for us is we're trying to recruit a new CEO, we're trying to recruit a new director, and how do we sweeten the pot to get sort of, you know, our target person, you know, she's the person we want from wherever. How do we entice her to come to Cincinnati and help run our nonprofit? And that's where we start seeing those things really come into the conversation.
So one of the things that I've been hearing more and more about, and I know it's not a new concept, but are cash balance plans. So I think, you know, some people have, you know, been looking at those. Do you, each of you, I'll let you chime in if you want, you know, any thoughts on those, you know, when they work, when a company, you know, somebody that's never heard of a cash balance plan, when they should look at something like that?
Well, I'll say one, I'm seeing a lot more interest with the looming increase in tax rates that are being proposed. It is a great way to shelter more income. My caveat is you don't put in a cash balance plan or any type of pension plan because you have one good year.
Mhm.
These are long-term fixed commitments, and you need to have stable income. I wouldn't necessarily look at it in an industry that's particularly volatile or cyclical. So you want steady income, but we're seeing a significant increase in interest in what we call the combo plans. They've got a 401k plan, but now they're looking at adding a cash balance plan to increase savings, primarily for obviously the business owners, key employees. It's a great way to shelter more money. It's more complicated. You need an actuary. Sometimes you have to pay PBGC premiums depending on the size of the plan. And it's a fixed long-term commitment.
Yeah, for those that don't know, cash balance is similar to an old defined benefit plan. You get the monthly annuity, except you have we'll call them hypothetical individual accounts. It's sort of how it works. So you can sock away a lot of money, but it has a lot more administrative effort. We've seen so many plans sort of moving away from the defined benefit world and sort of that monthly payment. Tax rates do influence those, but I've seen more companies get rid of their cash balance plans or sort of freeze them, if you will, than implement new ones.
I agree. There's not a huge market for it. It's very specialized market.
Yeah.
Laura, you mentioned long-term. What would you say is the minimum amount of time that an employer, plan sponsor should plan on offering the cash balance plan? And can the benefit of the cash balance plan run out after a certain number of years?
Well, it can, but I'd say you want to be looking at least 5 years. 5 years. And again, you don't put it in because you have one really good year. You need to have a history of good compensation and the ability to make these payments. We all remember 08 and 09 when every defined benefit plan we had froze because the market dropped. And that was the more traditional type of defined benefit plans. I think cash balance plans are less volatile in that respect, but the employer is responsible for the rate of return. They bear market risk. When the market drops a lot, the cost to the employer increases. So you're approaching these plans a lot differently. And you need to be very sensible. You need to have a good investment person working with you because you're probably going to take less risk with your cash balance money than you might with your 401k money.
Earlier we were talking about.
I'm sorry, go on, John.
No, I'd say earlier Laura was talking about fixed costs for your safe harbor plan. Cash balance is a fixed cost, but it's a variable fixed cost, if you will. You owe it every year, but you won't know how much you owe until much later in the year versus your we owe 3% on our salary for the safe harbor contribution. So you want 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 good years of, we can say we had consistent revenues and we had consistent cash available to make these contributions before you start thinking about jumping into the cash balance world.
I heartily agree with that, John. And I just say this as a business owner too. There are so many variables we can't control in the universe. Interest rates being one of them, market performance, sometimes even the demographics of your employee group. If you have a sudden change in the demographics of your employee group, the cost of your plan could increase significantly. So there are a lot of things you can't control in those type of plans. Just be prepared.
Yeah, if you're prepared and you sort of kick the tires, Paul's point, looked under the hood, it can be a great plan. It's just, it involves a lot more upfront work to get that ready to go.
And it's in the name. You got to make sure you have the cash.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I think we are down to our final few minutes here. So I want to thank all the panelists. I think this has been really helpful. I think what this shows everybody is there are so many different ways you can design a plan, and you just need to really work with people that specialize in this and take a look at it and make sure it works for where your company is right now, which could be very different than it was 3 or 4 years ago and 3 or 4 years from now. So, lean on your advisors, let them help you understand what else they're seeing in the marketplace. And there's so many new things out there with the Secure Act and the CARES Act. And, you know, it's a lot to keep up on. You know, everybody at the plan sponsors, you have a day job. So, you know, lean on your advisors to help with these sort of things. So I want to give Laura, Paul, and John just a couple minutes each, just with any final thoughts, anything, you know, you want to leave the group with before we go. So Laura, I will let you kick it off.
I would just add, and I don't know that we've talked about this, but all 401k plans that are on pre-approved documents have to be restated for what we call cycle 3 by July of next year. It is a great opportunity to revisit your plan design. If you haven't done it yet or haven't done it for a long time, this is an ideal opportunity. Sit down, talk with your providers, and look at your plan design. You have to do a restated document anyway. We also have some interim amendments we have to adopt next year. So it's an opportune time to do that.
Yeah,
Great
no,
point,
Laura, you stole my thought. You know, we're starting to, you know, Graydon, we're starting to restate plans for our clients. You know, and during that conversation, you know, I've had several of them that say, you know what, we've been thinking about safe harbor plan, or we've been thinking about automatic enrollment. You know, that's the time to do all those changes. You know, we've got some Secure Act, some CARES Act changes, and we're doing some of the optional amendments now while we're in the middle of restating your plans. But, you know, we're having those conversations with our clients about what do you want to do with your plan? You know, what do you want to do in the future with your plan? And it's a great time to make that change, or at least think about making that change. You know, maybe it's going to take 2, 3, 4 years to get comfortable with it, but it's never too early to start that, you know, and plan ahead. And sort of the last final thought is, you know, read your plan documents. I know it's not very exciting. I know that's why you pay lawyers and service providers and everybody else to read them for you, but take some time, read through it, because you know your company better than any of us do. You know your employees better than any of us do. You know, make sure your plan looks like what you want it to look like, and it runs the way you want it to run, because that will cut off so many problems in the future. If you're like, oh, we don't do it that way, we do it this way. Great, we can make an amendment super fast, fix your plan, and save trouble if the IRS or DOL ever come knocking.
Yeah, John, I think that's great advice. I mean, for those plans on here that, you know, get an audit, you probably know, I mean, that's our starting point. We read that plan document, and that's how we design what we're testing, because we're trying to make sure that you are adhering to what that plan document says. And that's, if we find problems, that's usually where it is because an employer was doing one thing because that's how they thought the plan read, but that's not actually what was checked in that box, or somebody didn't understand what they were checking. So, you know, I echo what John said. I just really encourage everybody to read that. It's not, I know it's not exciting, but it will help you make sure that you are doing what you're supposed to do when you're administering these plans. So, all right, Paul, last but not least.
Yeah, so I just want to echo everyone else's sentiments. I mean, plan design should be very purposeful. Reading the plan document is critical. Aligning the operation with plan document provisions is also important, if not critical. If it's not happening, there are remedies, you know, to correct it for sure. But don't just put the plan design in place this year and let it go. I mean, review it at least once a year. And also don't forget, there's going to be law and regulatory changes. So make sure that, you know, your trusted advisor, your trusted service providers are bringing those regulatory and legislative updates to your attention. Time-wise, make sure that they're getting implemented. If they're mandatory implementations, make sure they're getting implemented timely, and stay focused, make it purposeful.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, very much. We really, really appreciate it. Hope everybody got something out of that. Feel free to reach out to any of us with any questions. And Katie, I'll turn it back to you.
Just to echo what Beth said, I will send the follow-up email with the link to the recording, as well as the email addresses for all of our panelists and our moderator today. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Again, the CE certificates will be submitted once we have time to review the attendance report. But if no one has anything else, let us know if you need anything, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.